Let's continue with the amazing fun that we've got with this kind of massing that we've set up over here now by focusing more on the actual facade. If you're new here, make sure you watch part 1 to how we got to this massing, or if you know how to do this massing, you're more interested in how we set up this sort of parametric facade, then you're in the right place. So for reference purposes, this is what we're going to be doing with something similar at least, where we've got a facade and it's modular, and you can already start to see our modules over here. And now what we're going to do is design 3 different modules. I think you can see 2 here, but at some points I had 3. And then we're going to position them, sometimes even randomly, inside of this setup that we've created over here. So let's get started. Okay, so I saved this here as a new file. Let's first join our areas so you can see my hotkeys. All right, so let's start right away. So I'm going to duplicate this with Alt-D, duplicate linked. And if you look at the previous video, we set this up in a way with geometry nodes where we're duplicating the facade from one side to the other side. And that's what this cube is called. So we can say, see here, facade mirrored. And now, because this is in this collection, which is called facade base, that's why it's getting mirrored. If we drag it out of there, you see it's not mirrored anymore. Great. Next, let's get rid of the array modifiers. And now we know that this is exactly linked. I'm going to Shift D and duplicate this just so we have a nice, simple setup here. And now let's start the fun. Right, so the simplest one that we're going to do, in fact, maybe we can sketch it out, right? So the annotate tool in Blender is quite useful for these kinds of things because, yeah, we can just sketch out. So we're going to have a one with a balcony, right? We're going to have a module with some sort of balcony. Usually what I experimented a lot with while making this is having some kind of strong verticals, right? And those verticals are kind of independent of what we've got in the modules over here. And then in between the verticals, then we have our actual modules. But the idea is that the verticals are read like more strongly than any kind of horizontal elements that we've got. And that's what we're going to do here. So we're going to create like a really nice vertical element that's going to be the same no matter which version of the facade that we're doing. Then we're going to have a version of the facade that's both pushed back and pushed out with a balcony that we have on one side. And then we're going to have a bit of a solid on either side. By the way, we can change the color of these annotations because you can see I'm using the annotate tool, which is super handy for having these kinds of sketches. And if we go into view annotations, and here we got the node, we can have multiple layers. If I change from RGB to HSV and change the saturation to 0, I find white works so much better. Now we got to be a little bit tricky about exactly where it's happening because as you can see, it's based on the view, and if we move our view around, things are not aligned as well as they should, right? So I'm going to press and hold Control to erase the node. But there are different options. So we can also put the placement on the 3D cursor. That's where it is actually at the moment. So that's the angle that it depends on. But we can also put things on the surface. And the nice thing is if they're on the surface, they stay no matter how we change. So remember what we're talking about here. We want to have these really strong horizontals. And now you can see that, yeah, we're kind of sketching in 3D, which is pretty amazing. This is only the annotate tool. There's the whole grease pencil tool, which takes this to the completely next level. But I'm going to go back now and just use our view. What I usually do is do like fairly straightforward sketches. And then I take a screenshot. Okay, so we're going to have a bit of depth in here. Right, my mouse I'm sketching a bit badly today because I guess my tablet is on a side. Anyways, that's not an excuse, is it? So we got glazing. We've got some depth here, presumably a lot more depth. This is looking a little bit better. I'm just going to focus on that. Just ignore that. Okay. You don't want to look like you're sketching bad if that's what I get paid to do, you know. Doesn't look very professional. Okay. Yeah, I'm not the best sketcher when it comes to architecture sketching, but it's pretty impressive. My wife is probably the only person that knows that whatever I sketch, even if it looks like total chicken scratch, I can then make a pretty nice model out of it. Pretty nice project. So that's it. Very simple, very straightforward. Just some glazing with some solid elements on the side. Let's take a screenshot of this, just so we have it for our own references. If you're in Windows, by the way, use ShareX, which is a program for snapping screenshots. I really like it, much better than the print screen default. On Mac, it's I think a bit better than on Windows, but in Windows, yeah, you can sketch and things on top of them as well. A little side note. Now let's get back into the business here. Serious business we got going on of making fun buildings. The serious business of making fun buildings. Might put that on a headline somewhere. So how do we do this? Because we're kind of symmetrical, it's really cool because we can work with only one side of the thing. So let's create a loop cut just in the middle. We ignore that one there. And now go to selection, select this face, get rid of it. And we see the origin point is exactly in the middle. That's what we need because we're going to be using, take a guess what? Oh, right. This is live. So let's undo that. And I think I might have some duplicate vertices. Yeah, good. I like when mistakes happen in real time because I must have tried to extrude something or duplicated something. I don't even know what. Anyways, let's select everything. And because we have some duplicate information in here, let's go and merge vertices by distance. Now that removes 6 vertices. I have no idea where they came from. I must have done something. But now if we try to just move these around, we can see that everything is more correct. So because this is linked, let's just play a little bit by moving one of these vertices out, right? There you go. And now I'm going to extrude this a little and let's start to give maybe some materials. This is totally different than what I had planned, but just playing with it a little and you can see how fun it can be to be an architect, be a designer, be an artist. So let's create a new material slot. We already have glass, which we created in the last session. Click assign. And let's just do material preview. And there it is. I mean, that looks totally different than what I had planned, but it doesn't look bad either. Yeah. So that's one option. I'm just going to keep that in there. And now let's create a different. So this is like the really powerful system here. Exactly this, right? Because when you're in these concept stages, you're creating a facade of a building. I don't know about you or if you know how the architecture industry works, but for me, I have to do at least 10, 20, maybe even sometimes iterations to get to the right facade that I'm happy with, that my team is happy with, that the client's happy with, that the consultants are happy with, that the municipality is happy with, right? Because depending on the jurisdiction that you're working with, the municipality might have a lot of say, whereas in other jurisdictions they don't, but you have to respect the client's wishes. Or in third, the materiality, the availability of different materials or different techniques that you can build these up with. And yeah, all these things can be nicely considered here. So really cool thing is that now we have something that's very strongly vertical. But if you go back in here, I'm going to duplicate this edge, Shift D, and extrude it over on this side like that. And now I'm going to extrude this down. Let's use the extrude region tool and type in -0.2. And now we have something that's also horizontal. And wow, I mean, really, that looks really good for 2 minutes of work. Okay, so what if we want to play? Even though, you know, sometimes more play generates less articulated solutions. But we have to try it until we know. That's the beauty about having really powerful yet super easy to use tools like what we've got in Blender to test all these kinds of solutions out. Because if this panel is different, and this panel is different, and this panel, you know, it can get so busy that you lose the original concept of this kind of edge, solid edge, kind of growing from here, wrapping around the building and coming down. Whereas now, that is for sure the strongest point of it, especially, you know, if you continue to make this sort of black and white, and it also almost nicely aligns with our bottom over here. Of course, we can make it align even better by extending that edge and so on. Right, so one solution and ideal for that is setting up a few more viewports so we can save this and we can build our own catalog, you know, that you either show your key stakeholders. So this camera feels like it's very slightly rotated. I don't know how it happened. I like this to be exactly 90 to have our perfect vertical lines. Okay, so Shift D to duplicate this camera, move it around. We're gonna create two viewports again. Last time we right clicked here and we have vertical split, but if you go to this like edge of the corner, you have to play a little bit until you get it right, and click and drag. And now we've got the second one. And T for toolbar and for sidebar. Don't know YN. Let's go to camera view, and that's what we're editing here. And let's find our camera. By the way, if you press the dot on the keyboard, not the number pad, and that goes and finds our correct things. I like to have a collection that's called setup. And here we put things that are kind of independent from the geometry. So cameras are going to go in here. The person can go in here. That's about it for now. Let's close this facade base, put this here. I'm going to move the facade base in between these two layers. Nope, not there, here. And let's call this geometry. Excellent. And by the way, all these hidden ones, these are the previous geometries that we played with. We can put these in a new collection. And that could be massings all one. I'll put this one over here. Let's disable it, and massing chosen. I don't know what to call it. Maybe that. And that's only the geometry that we're currently working with. And we've got facade base 1. These are the panels basically. Facade base 2. We've got the mirrored facade, by the way. And again, if you haven't checked out the previous video, make sure you do, because yeah, with the way we set up this is pretty cool. And yeah, it's all there, automatic for us. Then we've got the ground. We got massing. Massing. What is all this massing stuff? So let's call this something better. This is facade solid. This is facade ground. And this is facade ground side. This is all this is depending on how much time you have. You know, if the client is, I'm meeting the client in 5 minutes, I'm not going to worry about naming things tonight. Ideally, this is how it should be in every project. Is it always like that? Definitely not. My super quick files. In fact, let's just show you. I think, do I have it open? I don't. The file that I did, it was just yesterday, really. It feels so long ago already. It's by no means so clean in any way whatsoever. So just to show you where we're getting to, I'm sure you know, you can get a good sense. Let's go here. I think I have material preview enabled, so it's going to take a little bit of time. But, you know, things are actually kind of nicely named, but it can get really messy really quickly. 35 shaders compiling. Yeah, so you might have experienced that yet or not, but compiling shaders in Eevee, like the first time you do a preview with Eevee in Blender, might take a while. Okay, there you go. So let's just see. I'm curious how dirty, because I wasn't really paying attention to this, and I have one floor. Okay, you know what? It's not that bad. And then, yeah, it gets a bit random when you run out of time. Anyways, back to here. Okay, so we're setting up cameras, and we're going to save these cameras. So we built up a catalog of different versions. So we have one view, which is this view that we've got over here. Let's see this view over here, which is the other side, and maybe this is more towards the front. Yep, something like that. Let's adjust our camera proportions. So again, the default is 1920 by 1080. Let's make it square, 1920. And that should already, yeah, for some reason, when we change the proportions, the higher it is, the more like the sensor crop stays the same. Yeah, we're just expanding the edge of the sensor crop. But if we increase the Y, then everything sort of shrinks. Do you see what I mean? So it's all dependent, I guess, on the Y or like on I'm not really sure. You kind of have to experiment with these kinds of things to understand them a little bit better. And now the same thing that we did with the camera before, which is give it a slight shift Y. I'll put it at 0 just to see where the eye level is. And if we move this up, you never see architectural renderings like that, or even architectural photographs. We try to keep the lines as vertical as possible. So 90 degrees, and we do the shift Y to 0.25. Let's see, that's good. 0.26 maybe. 0.27. 0.3, fine. There you go. So that's 0.3, and let's go back and see this camera. Again, to activate the camera, you click this little green icon in the outliner. That's the easiest way. This is quite a side view, so let's just now rotate this a little bit more this way. This angle is fine. Now it looks really different, right? It feels quite solid in one direction and less solid in the other. So this could be a good reason, like if we want to block like really early light or really late light or something that, let's go inside of the building and see. So if we're here, you see we've got a nice view in that direction, but a less clear view in that direction. So if we have maybe just next door, or just across the street, but a little bit to the side, a building that might look ugly, right? Or something that's not the nicest to catch the eye, we can also use the facade to angle it in this direction. So we have better views. Okay, let's set up a couple more cameras. So Shift D, I'm going to make this exactly 0 degrees. Let's make this active. And now we have a front view, but it's not an orthographic view, it's still perspective. And we can play to see what looks better. So this is the perspective view. In the camera data settings, here we can change this from perspective to orthographic, and we have to change the scale quite a bit, 60. And now let's go back to perspective. The perspective definitely gives us a bit more depth, let's say. So I'm going to keep it as the perspective. And then it's good to have a camera that's sitting up high, so a bird's eye view. And that can be also an isometric one. So Shift D, Z. Let's make this active. Let's name it Cam Bird's Eye. And this one is going to be called Cam Front. Cam Front. This is Cam Right. For the lack of directions, where's north, where's south, I don't know. So hey, there's something I tend to avoid usually, which is just calling things left and right, because depending on which side of the road you're standing, left might be right and right might be left. You get what I mean. Okay, so this camera over here. Now, I always have to look this up, which is a ISO camera Blender, because it's not exactly 3060. it is this thing over here, which is 54.7 by 45 degrees. So 54.7, 45, 0. And now if we go to orthographic and increase the scale to, let's try 100. That's too much. Let's try 50. That's a proper isometric view that you can take into, let's say, Affinity Photo and continue to adjust. Oh, and let's get rid of the shift in the Y direction. And now let's go a little bit higher. Okay, so we've got this kind of isometric view. And now the only thing I don't like is that in orthographic mode, the camera takes up too much space. It literally takes that size, which then becomes hard to see. This size doesn't matter, does it? Can you make it negative? No. Haven't tried that before. Let's just make it 5. Okay, it changes it a little bit. But it's weird. It's like, yeah. So let's go to top. We are in top view. Duplicate this camera to somewhere over here. And now we want to rotate -45. And we can input formulas in here, which is super useful. So you just saw me what I did, right? So let's undo. So I have 45 here. And I type -90. And now that rotates. We can do that anywhere in these kinds of inputs. Let's make this camera active. Let's go to view. And now we see the other sort of view here. Great. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cameras for different kinds of massings. So now, because we're going to be using the cameras quite a bit, we want to see how it's going to look rendered. And at the moment, and we also want to hide like these setups that we've got here. So we can select both of them. Let's select them over here. M to move them to a new collection. And we're going to create a new collection. And we're going to say, oh no, we already did that, didn't we? No, that's the facade base. So that's one side of the facade. These are going to be called facade panels. So collect new collection. So select them, click M, move to a new collection and call it facade panels. Okay, so let's close that. So our view looks better. And now we're going to go to render engine. And I was using cycles. Let's use Eevee just for the sake of regularity. And now we want to find like a nice backdrop HDRI to use for just creating some of these. So we're going to go to polyhaven.com. So let's go here. Polyhaven.com. And I'm sure you probably know it by now, but this has all kinds of different HDRIs. When you use an outdoor, what time of the day do we want? Let's say, or morning, afternoon. Something perhaps a bit more urban, although this might create really nice shadows. So let's try that. So we want to download, 2K version is fine. So we're going to download this. And once that's downloaded, I like to keep my files together. So I'm going to put it in a folder that's associated with my project, just so things don't get lost. And I usually make like a textured folder in there. And it's on a different screen, so just bear with me for a second. I'm going to, just to make sure that everything is in the right place. Okay, so I've put that in the right place. So now here in Blender, we're going to go to shader editor. So we haven't used this thus far. And object, by the way, if we click on an object, you can see the exact same settings that we saw here. So we edited this base color basically and adjusted, roughness and so on. So if we change this base color, you see it also changes here. So that's the exact same setup that we see over here. However, this is just the basic one. Now models, or rather shaders, can get quite complex in the shader editor, and you can't see all that complexity in a linear format here in the properties. So that's why we've got the material setup duplicated into. For the most basic and straightforward and simple materials, this is enough, but for anything more complex, we usually use the shader editor. Then we've got the world, and we got our texture in the world. By the way, we also have world settings here, which is this red icon, and you can also see the exact same thing we've got going on in here. And this is a sky texture that I use by default. It's part of Blender, and if we turn that off, and we have our regular background, which is just white, which might be good enough. But I really like the preview that we were getting, so I want to match that, especially since it has some kind of nice shadow, which may or may not come from a lamp, but I don't think we ever added one, did we? We did not, so it's not coming from there. I'm not really sure where it's coming from then. It's a bit weird. Interesting. Yeah, because we have like a really clear... It might be some of the shading based on a specific angle that we're working with. So, with that, I did a dimension in here. So now if we change the color, you see that our color changes here, and our world is a red, scary, bloody world. We don't want that. We want a happy green ogre world, right? No, I'm kidding. We don't want that either. Let's reset the saturation to 0 and increase the color. And we want to get our texture here, our HDRI, or it's also an EXR. I think I downloaded, is it the default? I don't know why. Let's see. So the default is EXR, but HDRs are actually smaller files. So let's download the HDR. That does matter when you have a lot of textures, because the bigger the size, the harder it is to do things. So I'm going to just drag this HDR into here, and now we should be able to see it. If we go around, actually no, because it thinks it's an image, so we can't do it this way. We need to do it a different way. So add texture, and we want to add an environment texture. Now we already kind of loaded this in here, so it is going to be in there, but if it wasn't, I'm going to go to my folder setup, texture, and here it is, and now drag this into here. And now we're in a golf course. Amazing. So easy to be in there. And once we have our texture, we want to be able to rotate it, because maybe this is not the right way for the texture to be, or we need to play with the sun and so on. So we want to add a mapping, so vector mapping. No, that doesn't go there. So undo, and that goes in here. We want to plug this in here, and we also need to have that vector coming from a place. Really nice feature in Blender is if we drag out and just click, we have a search, and this search is a little bit different than just searching, because it can give us also the correct input. And I know exactly what I'm looking for, which is generated texture coordinates. So not only is it finding the texture coordinate node, but also inputting it into the generated one. So now if we go around, it looks all the same, but if we start to rotate in the Z, you see that all of this is rotating. And this is a new feature in Eevee, since Blender, gosh, they're moving so quickly these days. I think, did they introduce the new Eevee in 4.0, I think it was, wasn't it? Yeah, so now we've got lights, and we got shadows rather, and that's really nice, and that's really important. I'm not sure this is the right HDRI. It's a little bit too green, but anyways, let's see what one of the other cameras looks like. Maybe one of these. And we're not going to have all that kind of color information in the background. I'm going to show you a way where we can make it white. Okay. I'm just looking for more interesting reflections, maybe catching some trees in there as well, because that adds a bit of depth. We're going to need to play a bit with the glass material as well, just to make it more reflective. And usually I cheat and I make this metallic now, we want to change the settings to not use the transparent shader, just so we see exactly like a pure mirror of what it looks like to be in that space. Now back in the word editor, we want to rotate this until we have the nicest, kind of not the busiest, but like a nice and fairly busy background. We can also shift this slightly. So let's try 0.1, and it works backwards. So we need to go minus 0.1 to lift it up higher. So now we see a lot more of the context. We can also shift it in the other directions with a limited, like you can't shift it too much, right? Because then it gets distorted a lot. I really like that there's water here, but the reflections of that, like, we're in a road. Why do we have water as a reflection there? So we have to be careful of things like that a bit. Yeah. I think this is quite alright. Wow, even like the background trees, and yeah, that context could almost work, but it's too much for us at this point. We don't want to get distracted for things like thinking, oh wow, this building is in a golf course. So to change that, let's duplicate this background node. Let's add a mix shader. I saw this in a YouTube video maybe 10 years ago, and I've been using the same thing every single time, which is amazing. Now, we want the background to be white, but the lighting information still comes from the HDRI. The way to do that is to add a camera array factor. So we just type is camera array, the path, and you can see now that even though our building and our reflections are illuminated in the exact same way, we're picking up information from our second shader, which right now is black. So if we plug this in, now it's white, and it's slightly off white. And I used to not like that, but I kind of grew to like it because it gives us a little bit better refinement of the edges, especially in this case where we're dealing with white. Now, our glass here is completely reflective, which is probably a little too reflective. So we can go back and play with the material. And the actual default for glass is having metallic at 0, having roughness at 0, having alpha at 1, and changing the transmission to something like 0.8. Now that's supposed to be glass, and that depends on the image of refraction, which for glass is somewhere around, for thin glass, is somewhere around 1.05 to 1.1, depending on what we're dealing with over here. And for that surface, you can see some of the settings here. Let's make sure that it's a transparent shader, and we do want to use blended, and thickness is slab. I don't even know if that matters. That's some kind of new option here that I'm just discovering now. It's going to take a minute to calculate. Yeah, I'm noticing there's some new settings in here, which is quite nice. But as you can see, that glass maybe doesn't look exactly like glass because we still can't really see inside of it, even though it's pretty proper glass, right? So to change that is where we have to start playing with things. So usually I put that back as a default and play with the alpha value. Next, is this metallic or is it not? And I do find that metallic works quite a bit better. And then it's also playing with the actual color. So we have something like that with glass of color. Now we have to be careful. We have to use alpha as, we can't mix alpha and weight transmission, because then we get these kinds of like double shadows, which luckily we're not really seeing here. But I'm pretty happy with this. Now let's check the different kinds of cameras that we've got. So I'm going to go to this camera over here. That looks good. That looks good. That looks all right. Yeah, this is exactly the kind of feeling that we want of a glass-based building. Not of glass, but of the actual glass. And it doesn't look good in every image, right? Like here, now it's too transparent. So usually, like it's damn right hard sometimes to get one glass to look perfect in all the different situations. Also, let's adjust this material a little bit and make it a bit darker on the ground, and also this facade panel material there. All right, so now we have something that's like, let's call it really classic black and white. For the purposes of the axonometric drawings, I'm going to keep alpha at 1. Now, because it's axonometric, it's not catching nice shadows to reflect unless, you know, if we look at the angle of refraction, which is our active camera, so it's coming this way, so we need something. So if it's coming that way, we're looking at like 90 degrees, so it's something over here. So that's where we need like something interesting to happen so we can catch some kind of nice reflections. Maybe I'll just play with putting a couple of trees on there and extending the facade just so it looks a bit less dull in these kinds of situations. So yeah, we're actually covering presentation a bit earlier than I anticipated, but I guess it's quite important, isn't it, to have a hold on this as quickly as possible so we don't lose too much time. Now this road, we didn't really change materials too much except in the actual material preview, which again has gone in its own place. Sometimes it happens. So viewport display always keep on top and then surface on the bottom. Now let's go to material preview. So we changed the road, we made it a little bit darker, curb is okay. Pavement, usually we should put some kind of brick texture on there, and then green is slightly, we can even copy color. So I'm going to hover over here, Control C, hover over here, Control V. Just something like that. Maybe we reduce the saturation even more, so it's there, but it's faint. Like, I don't want these colors to be accurate textures at the moment, but just some kind of indication of what is happening within the context. The next thing we're going to do is mirror this. So to do that's where our origin point is. We want to put that the same way that we were doing in the previous video, is by enabling here transform origins and then G to move it, and snap, because we have a mix but a vertex and an edge center, and now it's snapped over there. Make sure we uncheck this option over here, and now let's go to modifiers, add a mirror modifier, and change that from X to Y or both, because it doesn't matter. We see both in there. It's still pretty dark. Now I just want to see if I can get this right, if it's making sense. So I'm going to add a monkey. Monkey, if you don't know, is Suzanne, and this is the mascot of Blender. And why is it mirrored? I guess I'm doing that in edit mode. Am I? Oh, I know why. Because it's in our facade base folder, and that's the active one, the active collection. So it's very hard to tell which is the active collection. There's a slight kind of grayish outline of the active collection. Let's make masking chosen and put her in there, Suzanne. And then, because remember, this facade base is used for geometry nodes to mirror our facade on this side, which we do not want to do at the moment. This has the wrong material. I'm just going to duplicate this material here and make it something lighter. That's fine. Okay. And now I'm going to make just a placeholder model that's going to be slightly glowing. So let's go into object mode, and in here, let's expand emission and strength to something like 2. So now we have or like even 10, or why not 1,000. We have a glowing Suzanne, and she might be slightly yellow, even though when it's glowing so much, we don't really care what the color is. And now let's try to move her a little bit so we can find some reflections there. So we actually need that to be exactly in the road, right? Which is more or less correct, right? It's the angle of refraction. If we're looking from the camera over here, and it's the 90 degree sort of, reflection of the angle for it to be there. I was just thinking, because I want to have an add variation, but clearly having a monkey in our scene is going to be a bit too much, but I'm liking what we're getting here. So what we can do is hide the monkey in the viewport and from the camera, but it impacts our light. But that's a bit too complicated. Let's get rid of it for now. Instead, what we're going to do is add a couple of trees. So, okay, so I copied and pasted a tree from a different file, and I'm going to place it wherever my 3D cursor is. So we can either go here and press the 3D cursor, or shift right click and then press shift S and selection to cursor. So we've got a tree in here, and what we're going to do is actually array the trees. So let's add array, and factor, we can use 1, that's okay, and then a factor of like 2 or 3, and we have some kind of strange rotation here, so I'm going to clear the rotation, so we can just search for clear rotation. And now they're actually lying on the floor. That's because before geometry nodes, the previous procedural system, if you wanted to instantiate things like trees and people, that's how they had to be lying. So a lot of my assets are actually still facing that way because, yeah, I haven't edited them. So I'm going to apply the rotation now. Apply rotation. And Alt S to reset the location, the scale rather. Okay, so now that's all in the correct way. And let's add some trees. Set my shadows over there. Now they're not going to solve our dull facade as much. And in fact, sometimes they might be too much, but they give us a sense of scale. And we're definitely not going to have them in front of the building, even though there might be some in front of the building at some point. But for now, we're just going to keep them on the side. Let's extend this edge a little. Okay. And let's duplicate some of these trees over here. Okay. Now, because we are sort of preparing this scene with all its context a little bit, so this is contextual and rendering, so we can visualize different facade options for our building over here. We might as well finish the job by, first off, duplicating this, Shift D to duplicate it, hold the middle mouse button to lock onto the Y-axis, and now let's go to scale, and we want to scale -1 along the Y-axis. Now, if you look at our facade orientation, it's all red. So we need to select everything and then go to Mesh, Normals, Recalculate Outside, or just flip, Mesh, Normals, flip, and now it's blue again. When we scale by -1, which we tend to do quite a lot to just mirror geometry in the easiest possible way, then we have to always make sure that we flip our normals directions. Why is that important? Sometimes we get strange artifacts, or also some of the modifiers, like the solidify modifier, works based on the normal direction. So if you have two faces that are next to one another and the normals are facing a different way, your solidify modifier is not really going to look as smooth as it does here. Because if that face is flipped, why don't I just demonstrate that actually? And we have some flip faces here, which is good. It's good to do that every once in a while. So I'm going to flip this face, flip face. And now you should see something that looks bad, right? Because the solidify modifier is like making only either the positive or the negative direction of the normals face the right way. And if we have our face normals facing all over the place, then things don't look good. And now if I undo, now it's looking good. So that's why we want to keep our face normals facing more or less the correct way, as much as we can. When there are single faces like this, it's actually not such a big deal, but it can be if we start to add modifiers. Okay, let's go back into edit mode because we're doing this in edit mode. Select everything, not everything. Select here and hover over and press L to just select the linked information. Go to transform. We've got our snaps working with vertex and it's going to snap to that vertex just so we have a little bit more information that we're going to put some really plain buildings. So turn off face orientation, and let's go and add mesh plane. It's going to be, how big is the house? Like 12 by 12 meters. That might be a bit too much. So 8 by 8 meters. Maybe it's a little bit longer. So let's enable the grid for this. The increment is going to be a good place. Shift tab is the command to enable the snaps. So that should be too long, 2 meters. There you go. Now let's extrude this. So E extrude something like 6 meters, maybe 5 meters. And let's create a loop cut in the middle and select this edge, go to move and move it up. So we have some simple, very, very, very simple houses. I don't want to see these edges here. So let's select everything by clicking A, then X, and we're going to use an option called limited dissolve. And that makes this a non-quad face, meaning that if we try to create a loop cut in here, you see it does not go there. But it makes things simple, especially if we're going to use a modifier called wireframe, which is going to give us an option to render a wireframe even when we are in a rendered mode. Because as we noted in the previous video, when we're in render preview, like in the viewport, we have this kind of wireframe option, which does not exist, unfortunately, in the same capacity when we are rendering proper renders out. But we can cheat that with the wireframe modifier, which is what we're going to add now. So search wireframe, and by default, it makes our actual building disappear. First, we need a couple of material slots. So we're going to add a new material, which is called buildings context. And now let's add another slot, and that's going to be called just black. And we're going to create a new material that's going to be black. We're not going to use principled BSDF. So far, we've always used principled BSDF, which is the default. In this case, we're just going to click here and find a diffuse BSDF, which is something with, let's say, 100% roughness, which is more or less what we want when we are rendering out a black like wireframe. And buildings context, that can stay as is. We're just going to decrease the alpha, so by 0.5, so it's 50% transparent. So we should be able to see things. Everything is still transparent because we need to go back into the modifier and uncheck replace original. Let's also check boundary and make the thickness a little bit thicker, so like 0.1 meter. That might be too wide, but that's because, again, we have this object scale applied. So it's 0.1 times 4, so it's actually 0.4. So let's apply that scale by clicking on the object and then apply. We can apply all transforms, which we don't want. So let's just type scale, and it comes apply scale. So now that's the correct thing. We have a couple more things to fix here because this wireframe is not black yet. So here we have a material offset. If we offset the material by 1, now we get a really nice black sort of outline. Now you can see that the transparency is again all over the place in Eevee because it's using D-third. So we can go back in the settings here, go to settings, and render method, we can use blended. And that just looks much nicer. We don't need anything to be super realistic for our case for showing the context. We just need to see some kind of buildings in there. Now let's go back into this object, and we're going to do everything within the same object. So let's duplicate something over here, and we're going to scale it. So whatever we have scaled here, extrude it, select the face, and extrude again. And maybe move one of these faces a little. So this face over here, just to show kind of the typical variations that we see in houses. Now let's select everything, go to top view and duplicate this to somewhere over here, maybe rotate it 180 degrees. Now I'm going to start afresh, so just duplicate maybe the bottom face. Can't select it too easily. I'm fine with just using this edge then. Duplicate it somewhere over here. Let's say we're going to have a building over here, so we're in edge selection mode. Let's go to extrude and extrude that. Control space is an important hotkey, which maximizes our viewport. So right now we're only dealing with this, so we might as well just see that more clearly. Let's go into face selection. We can't really select that face here unless we click on X-ray mode, where we get these little dots. And we have to be, I think, here. Oh, we don't have that face yet. We need to create it. So let's extrude first. And because we have a context that's about that high, perhaps the building next door to us is going to be that high. Usually that's how it works, doesn't it? Unless it's a house and you start out with a house plot, and that's the reason why something has grown so much. Let's hide these obnoxiously big cameras. Good. Control space to go back into full screen. L to hover over. Shift D to duplicate. Let's move some faces over just a little to make the context a bit more varied. Perhaps this building is a little shorter, and Control R is the same hotkey as we get here for loop cut. So we're going to create this loop cut. Then let's go to move this edge, select everything linked, and then X, and then limited dissolve just to get rid of the additional angles. Very simple context here. We don't want to do anything too crazy because it's just to give us a sense of scale of what's next door to us. I'm going to create a loop cut here. Maybe this is got an extra floor over here, so 4 meters. No. By the way, we can preview. We can adjust the previous command over here. There's a little pop-up which is usually minimized if you externalize it, or if you it's not maximize, expand it. There you go, that's the word I was looking for. Let's make this 3 meters, and now we've got something that looks like a massive house compared to those houses next door. I'm not really sure which one is the right scale at this point. I'm just going to edit things as I see fit. And I'm going to do it even quicker now. So Shift D to duplicate this. It will help you see like the kind of speed that you can also work with when you are working with Blender, and you get to find your way around it a bit more. And notice also I'm using more of hotkeys than the toolbar, but everything I'm doing here, which is basically extrude, and G, which is for move, is found for here. And remember, you can see what I'm doing exactly in this corner, unless I'm covering it, which I'm usually not, but this time I was. Okay, so we got something shorter here. We can also move a face there, select everything, X, limited dissolve. We can do it one by one, or, there's many different ways to do it. Let's duplicate that. Go over here. Now, we don't want to be just with houses because that looks a bit obnoxious, doesn't it? If we're the people that decided to build something really tall, but everybody else didn't. So let's make something quite tall here. Control, Shift is to expand the selection. Control is to subtract from the selection. I know because some AutoCAD programs, it's the opposite, right? Control is to expand, Shift is to subtract. So it depends on where you're coming from. But SketchUp and Rhino, they work in the same way as well. I want to create like a nice angle here, a nice edge over here. So I'm going to select this edge, right click, subdivide. We created a new vertex. I'm going to drag it now, and let's go to vertex selection to snap this over here. J is the hotkey to connect them. Found this totally randomly. It's one of the best things that I found totally randomly. Sometimes it happens, doesn't it? And now we're just changing things around ever so slightly. There. Just like what you would have on a typical similar plots, right? Maybe they started out as houses, and a lot of those houses got built up by different kinds of volumes, and some of them are still houses. Some are small houses, some are maybe house-like buildings that are not terribly big, and some are maybe a bit too big. Let's move these faces in. I'm just going to select everything again because, again, this is part of the same building. X for the delete menu and limited dissolve to just get rid of all those extra vertices that we've got. Great. So now we've got some kind of context. And let's go and see how it looks in our cameras. And let's go to preview. In fact, we can just go to rendered and see. Now that facade is really black. But we do see a bit more of the content. Now, the only thing I would like to add, the only thing watching myself doing these kinds of videos over the years, I noticed some things that I say quite a lot, and that's one of those things that I say a lot. So that's why I'm laughing a bit at myself. The only thing, and then the only thing again, and then the only thing again, and so on. I'm going to apply this mirror modifier because I want to edit some of these things that we've got over here. So with the mirror modifier here, let's click on this arrow and apply. So now all that geometry is kind of fixed. Why do we do that? Let's select, first off, let's select everything and then right click. Where is it? We need to be in the edge selection. Right click, merge vertices by distance. And now we got rid of some of the vertices. This one, that one, and that one were the ones that were repeating, because when we did that whole kind of flip zone area thing, that's where it happened. What happened? You might be asking, where we flipped things. Okay, now let's select this edge. So Alt click and move it. And let's create another loop cut. Hopefully everything is quad. See this? Let's undo that. Click and hold to move it. And that's pretty good. So that's our site right here, our plot rather. And the plot, why am I doing this? So our plot can have a slightly different color. So I'm going to create a new slot. First off, I'm going to assign green as a starter, assign the material, and we need to duplicate this green, but we can only do that in object mode. So we need to go into object mode, and now we can see that we can do it. Green on one, and I'm just going to make this a little darker, and also here. So now if we go to material preview, we can tell that that's special in one way or another, probably because it's our building. I'm going to select everything in here now, A to select, duplicate it and just move it over here. Maybe rotate it 180 degrees, so it's not exactly the same. And now I'm going to copy what? Let's duplicate this to somewhere over here. You know what? No, we're going to have a big building over here as well. So X faces, L to select this, Shift D and move this edge to somewhere over here. So that building is a bit chunkier here. Maybe it's an old building, old chunky building. I want to create a loop cut somewhere over there, and okay, it has to have, it's very hard as an architect. I'm always thinking about the human scale. And the problem with these big old chunky Soviet communist blocks, or even, modernist blocks even in the West, is that, they don't really do a sense of scale that well, do they? Okay. So we got something going on. Here's a context that I'm pretty happy with. Maybe, just because we have it a bit more extended in one direction, let's extend it a little more in the other direction and go back to all of our context and duplicate just some random things. L, Shift D, Alt A to deselect, L, Shift D, Alt A to deselect, L, and L, Shift D, and then L, Shift D. There you go. Nice and simple and straightforward context. And now, of course, if you have that much context, we might as well have that many trees. Well, probably that's a big block by now. We should have some but we're not going to worry about intersections at this point. So just thinking, of how urban design works. Let's add some more trees. Also over here. And also, what are we going to do here? Let's rotate this tree along the Z-axis because we're in a 3D view. It's going to rotate, along the view or something like that. So we want to press Z and then rotate 180. And by the way, R is the hotkey for rotation. And now let's increase the number of trees. Now our context might look a little bit more animated. Yeah, we've got shadows and things, and that looks good. And I thought we changed the setting, so let's just double check. So this is buildings, context, and that should be in the settings to blend it. It is blended. Thickness, slab. No idea what this does. I think it's kind of like a new setting, but it doesn't seem to do much of a difference unless it's, yeah, we don't even need to do ray trace transparency. I'm looking for the simplest possible thing. Intersection fast. Yeah, that should be kind of good. I guess we have to, it might just be a resolution setting in regards to like how big these shadows are, but that's pretty good. So we're in a good place now with the setting, with the context being done. So let's render and create new options. And as you can see in this case, the actual option to make this took 2 minutes, but setting up our scene took an hour. And in the next video, I said it's going to be in this video, but now this video is getting quite long, and I think you might want to also have it a bit more split. In the next video, we are going to delve deep into the facade. And I don't know if you guys noticed, but I noticed like a few words that ChatGPT and similar AI kind of systems tend to use a lot, and delve and elevators, some of those. So I try to not use them, but now I used one. Doesn't matter, does it? Okay, F12 to render. How's this? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, even these are a bit better. This is just TV again, remember. Okay, so we want to save this. I'm just trying to see. You know, the facade is a little bit dark, but it is what it is at this point. So Alt S to save, out, and I usually make a name. So 24, 11, 27 images. Here you go. Let's keep this a JPEG at 94%. I find that to be a very good kind of intermediate between quality and image size. And let's start. So how shall we do that? I think there is an automated, I might research that for the next video. I used to use some automated versions where we can select a bunch of cameras, or I'm sure it exists. They're in a collection and it automatically renders all of them. So let's make sure our cameras have good names. This one is maybe something we're not going to need, it appears. So let's maybe first turn them all on. Delete this camera. And now let's filter through them. Okay, this is Axon Cam Axon 01. This is Cam Axon 02. Okay, this is Cam Front. Okay, so good thing we're previewing these because clearly those trees don't work that well. So let's change, what are we going to change here? We're going to change the distance. Let's make it 6 meters in between. And now let's move it in a way where it works a bit better. We need more, 7 meters. I can live with that. There's a bit of intersection, but enough for us to understand that we can still read the shape. So that's good. So that's cam front, cam light. I think that's supposed to say cam left. Cam eye level left, cam eye level right. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cameras. Okay, so you know, I was thinking we're gonna manually render all these and save them in a location with a different option, but you know, we got 5 cameras. Let's say we're gonna do 5 options. That's 25 cameras. And I looked around, in case you don't know, in preferences, extensions, and anything with views, and we can also preview things on extensions.blender.org for, you know, camera batch. And there are loads of different solutions, but they're mostly paid. And what we need is like a really simple script, which is if we go here at the scripting tab, I've made such a script, which is saying, let's look for the objects, find the camera ones, and print them and render them out. And they're rendering out based on the output location that we set up over here. And that's not working terribly well because it's kind of setting this up as a strange one. So first we want to save this up. And then, so I just added a couple of lines. I'm making this as we're speaking, basically. I mean, I had an old file and, it's not a terribly complex one. But there was something wrong with the format. So everything we set up here, we would set up everything out anyways, which is in the output properties. We want to use a JPEG 94%, and here we specify the resolution. Right, so once that's done, and once we set up a location, which should probably be a relative path, and it should be one of the recent ones. Let's see where we are. We're here. I'm going to use output, and that's our location. And here we are. And so within this folder now, it's going to put all of them. And we want to do something in here as well, though. We want to write that there is a specific option. And for the first one, this should be option.01. Now, again, I understand that this might be a little bit more complicated. So let's just write option equals option 01. But I'm gonna copy and paste this file. So you guys, it's in the actual file, so you can just copy and paste it in here, or you can take a screenshot and convert that to text if you need to as well. So option, so bpy context scene render is this file, and we're going to say option here plus option plus output location plus camera name. There you go. So we're ready to render. So I'm going to press the play button. It's always a good idea to save. So the idea is that we have option 01 with the current settings. And in fact, let's just make sure that we know what we've got at the moment. And that works pretty well. And let's press it. Cool, so this is done, but it's not in the exact folder because I messed up my location over here. So that's in C drive, option 01, option 001. And we want to just change a couple of things here. So that option should come after this. So plus option, and now plus camera name. And here we specify it. And we can also add plus and maybe make some kind of, asterisk or dash or line or something to indicate that, maybe like that. Okay, so now we press render, and it's gonna go, and it should hopefully print all of those for us, which we see in the system console. And it's telling us exactly how much time each one of those took. And now it's exactly in the correct position with the correct name. So that's it. It's a really simple script, and I do encourage to find, maybe if not your scripts, somebody else's scripts that can help you do this. And this is an excellent little start. And just to show you, so this is what we've got here. We got our option 1 that's done. And what's amazing is that once we have this scripting done and we have our layouts done, we have everything to basically become machines in making loads and loads of different iterations. So in the next video, we are really going to go and make really cool parametric iterations of the facade. And then we're going to carry on with the plans and populating those.